All right, welcome back to the deep dive. So this time, we're taking a look at something pretty specific, I guess you could say.
Yeah, very focused this time.
You listeners sent in a book called Alpha Male, The Path to Hardcore Natural Bodybuilding. Sam DeLucia is the author. That's really only the start, though, right?
Right. Alongside the book itself, we've also got some website excerpts, sites mentioned in the book. Oh, and some emails and things from readers, getting a peek into their mindset, things like mantras, that kind of thing. Hardcore natural bodybuilding, that's the focus.
Hardcore Natural Bodybuilding. Okay, so what are we doing with all of this? What's the goal?
Well, it seems like what we're really going for here is trying to understand this approach. What are the main ideas behind it? What is it that makes it different from the more mainstream fitness stuff? What we see a lot of. I mean, obviously, if you're listening to this, you're at least interested in bodybuilding at some level, but maybe you're not super into hardcore natural bodybuilding.
Right. So maybe you're totally into bodybuilding. Maybe you're not. Regardless, we're just going to dive into this and see what we can find.
Exact.
So the book starts off addressing the reader directly, I noticed, and kind of immediately starts challenging the usual promises, I guess you could say, you see a lot in the fitness world.
Yeah, it's like right off the bat, it's like, forget about adding inches to your arms in a few weeks.
Right. I mean, that's a pretty common thing you see advertised. So what does the book say about that?
Well, the book makes it very clear. If you're training naturally, you're simply not going to get as big as the professional bodybuilders who are on steroids. I mean, that's the reality of it. It's a really central point in the book, and they really emphasize that natural versus enhanced difference.
It is a pretty fundamental distinction.
Right.
So how does the book address the fact that this isn't always clearly stated, that people can take steroids to get bigger?
Well, it pretty much says that the magazine and supplement industries really benefit from people not really understanding this distinction.
Why is that?
Because they're selling products.
Oh, okay. So they make money off of people thinking they can look like someone who is using steroids, even if they're not using steroids themselves.
Right. If you think it's possible to achieve that kind of physique naturally, well, then you're more likely to spend money on supplements and magazines hoping to find the secret. But the secret is steroids, and they aren't going to tell you that.
Right.
So the book is pretty critical of that whole aspect of the fitness industry. And this is kind of where this idea of the brotherhood comes in.
The brotherhood.
Yeah, it's this online community for natural lifters who are looking for something different, a more honest and hardcore approach.
Yeah. It makes sense that a lot of natural lifters might feel kind of alienated by that mainstream fitness narrative.
Right, exactly.
So what does the book say hardcore natural bodybuilding actually is? Like, how do you do it?
Well, basically, it's about pushing yourself really hard with basic exercises. Compound movements, heavy lifting. Of course, you also have to eat right, sleep enough, make sure you're recovering properly.
So really emphasizing the importance of consistent effort, long-term commitment, because basically good habits.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not about chasing fads or quick fixes. That ties into the book's criticism of those who jump on the latest trends. Like whatever new exercise or workout routine is being promoted, or people who spend all their time doing isolation exercises without building a solid foundation first. The book calls those people pretenders.
Pretenders.
Yeah, pretenders. They're pretending to be serious about bodybuilding, but they're not really doing what it takes to actually build real, solid muscle mass.
It's interesting how there always seems to be that debate in the strength training world, between the people who are all about those fundamental exercises that work a bunch of muscles at once, and the people who are more focused on targeting very specific muscles.
Yeah, it's definitely a classic back and forth.
So how do you know if this whole hardcore natural thing is even for you?
Well, the book actually has this quiz called Are You Ready to Become Hardcore? And some of these questions are pretty revealing.
Okay, like what?
Well, some of them are about disliking workouts that aren't intense, seeing supplement ads as ridiculous, and even preferring a really basic gym with heavy weights and loud rock music over a fancy gym with all the latest equipment and amenities.
So it paints a pretty specific picture of what it means to be hardcore.
Yeah.
It seems like there's this real emphasis on rejecting the superficial aspects of fitness, focusing on just pure hard work and intensity.
Exactly. It's about getting down to the essence of what it means to build muscle naturally.
And to drive that point home, the book uses a pretty well-known analogy.
You're talking about the red pill and blue pill, right? From
Yeah.
the Matrix.
Yeah.
In this context, it's like you're presented with a choice. You can either accept the images presented by the mainstream bodybuilding world, the airbrushed physiques, the supplement promises, that's the blue pill.
Right. Or you can choose to see the reality of hardcore natural training, which is the red pill, the hard work, the dedication, the pain even.
It's a powerful way to frame the decision.
It really is. And this leads pretty naturally to the book's stance on supplements and the magazines that promote them.
And it doesn't hold back.
No, it does not.
It basically accuses professional bodybuilding, these fitness magazines, and the supplement industry of being built on misleading information.
Strong words.
It really is a central argument of the book.
It even goes so far as to include this satirical offer, how to become a professional bodybuilding mogul.
And how do you do that?
Well, by basically selling false promises through these glossy magazines and unregulated supplements.
It's pretty scathing commentary.
It is. But it's interesting because it also brings up a real point about the purpose of these magazines. Is it really to provide effective training advice?
It's debatable, isn't it? The book argues that their primary purpose is actually to sell supplements. They need to create a market for these products, and that's where the misleading information comes in.
The book backs this up by mentioning that since 1994, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, have had a lot less oversight over supplements.
So what does that mean?
Basically, it means that supplement manufacturers can make a lot of claims about their products, even if they aren't really supported by solid scientific evidence. They just need to have some research, often research they funded themselves, to back up their claims.
I see. So the book is raising some serious doubts about how much consumers can really trust the marketing surrounding supplements.
Exactly. And this skepticism extends to specific types of supplements.
Like what?
Well, for example, protein powders. The book actually quotes a nutritionist who says that she almost never sees strength training athletes who aren't already getting enough protein from their normal diet.
Interesting. So are they saying that protein powders are useless?
Well, not necessarily useless, but they're saying that for most people, they're probably unnecessary. They argue that if you're eating a balanced diet with enough protein from whole food sources, like lean meats or dairy, adding supplemental protein isn't going to give you any additional benefits.
It might even put extra stress on your kidneys.
Right, so it's not like protein is bad. They're just saying most people don't need to supplement it on top of a decent diet.
Makes sense.
Then there's creatine.
Ah, creatine. What does the book say about that?
Well, it acknowledges that there might be some short-term effects, like maybe a small increase in weight over a month or so, but it questions how much of that weight gain is actual muscle mass versus just water retention.
Okay.
It also points out that the quality of different creatine supplements can vary a lot, and that we don't really know much about the long-term safety of using it.
So their main point about creatine seems to be that the benefits might be pretty limited, especially if you're not training super intensely all the time. And even if there are some benefits, there might be simpler, safer, and cheaper ways to get similar results.
Exactly.
Okay. So what other supplements do they talk about?
Let's see. They talk about HMB, DHEA, and androstenedione.
Oh, and what's the verdict on those?
For HMB, the book says that some studies in animals showed some potential, but it hasn't really been proven to work in humans. As for DHEA, well, the claim is that it can convert to testosterone in the body, but they say that doesn't necessarily translate to noticeable muscle gains for lifters. And then with androstenedione, well, studies actually showed no significant difference in strength compared to a placebo.
Huh. So it seems like a lot of these supplements don't live up to the hype, especially for those who are training naturally.
Exactly. And the book really emphasizes that point with a quote from a strength coach named Kirk Adams. He says that supplements should always be secondary to the fundamentals, things like hard training, good nutrition, and proper rest. He also makes the point that your genetics play a huge role in what you can ultimately achieve physically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Your genes determine your potential, and the rest is about doing the work to reach that potential.
Right. And the book really boils it all down to this. The only supplement you really need is dedication. Dedication to your training, to eating right, to getting enough sleep, and to having the right mindset.
The book also quotes Ed Corney, a legendary bodybuilder, and he basically says that if you're trying to achieve the physiques you see in magazines by relying on supplements, you're going to be disappointed. He's very clear about the fact that those physiques often involve steroid use, and supplements just aren't going to bridge that gap.
Forget the quick fixes. Focus on the basics. That's the message.
Exactly. Put in the work. That's what really matters.
So this emphasis on hard work and dedication really leads into the mental side of training, which the book explores in a chapter called Become the Alpha Male.
Become the alpha male. Okay, now that sounds interesting.
It starts with another quote, this time from Kirk Adams. He talks about how important it is to be completely focused during your lifts and to break through the mental barriers that hold you back.
So it's about that mind-muscle connection.
Exactly. And it's in this chapter that they introduce this concept of the alpha male, drawing a comparison to the animal kingdom.
So what do they mean by that?
Well, think of the alpha male in a pack of wolves, for example. It's the leader, the one who's in charge. The book is basically saying that you need to have that same kind of mentality when you walk into the gym. You've got to be the alpha, determined, confident, and unstoppable.
I see. So it's not just about physical strength, it's about mental strength as well.
Exactly. It's about having that leadership mentality, that unwavering self-belief, and bringing that into your training.
Okay. And what about distractions?
They talk about that too. They say you have to be completely focused when you train, block out all the distractions. They contrast this with people who exhibit what they call lat syndrome.
Lat syndrome.
Yeah, those guys who are constantly walking around the gym flexing and trying to show off their muscles. Yeah.
You see that sometimes.
The book sees this as a sign that someone isn't really serious about their training. They're more focused on appearances than results.
So it's about substance over style.
Exactly. It's about the work, not the show. And that ties into this idea of pride of being natural. The book really emphasizes that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's presented as a real badge of honor. Choosing to build your physique naturally without resorting to shortcuts or substances. They even go so far as to suggest that you should avoid using any supplements at all.
So it's about separating yourself from the supplement industry and all the misleading information that comes with it.
Right. It's about being authentic, being true to yourself, and achieving your goals through pure hard work and dedication. And of course, the book strongly condemns the use of steroids.
That's not surprising.
No, it fits with the overall philosophy.
It does. So what's their alternative? What do they recommend instead of steroids and supplements?
They emphasize the importance of consistency, a good diet, heavy training, and sufficient rest. They even reference athletes from ancient Greece and Rome as examples of individuals who achieved impressive physiques naturally, long before steroids and supplements even existed.
Yeah, that historical perspective is really interesting. It shows that building a substantial amount of muscle naturally is definitely possible. It's been done for centuries.
Exactly. And the book really drives home the point that it takes sacrifice. Pushing through those tough workouts, enduring the soreness and the fatigue. They even include some quotes from Vince Lombardi, the legendary football coach, the one who said, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all."
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Well, the book uses his quotes to illustrate the importance of perseverance, of pushing through those moments when you want to give up.
So it's about embracing the struggle, knowing that it's all part of the process.
Right. And then they talk about limits. The idea is that a lot of the limits we have are actually self-imposed. We tell ourselves we can't do something, and then we don't even try. They use Arnold Schwarzenegger's example of the 500-pound deadlift. For a long time, it was considered impossible for anyone to deadlift that much weight. But then Arnold came along and did it.
So they're basically saying that belief is a powerful thing.
Exactly. If you believe you can do something, you're much more likely to achieve it. They also talk about the importance of visualization and imagery.
What do they mean by that?
Well, for visualization, they give an example of visualizing a heavy squat set before you do it.
So you're mentally going through the motions, imagining yourself performing the exercise correctly and successfully.
Exactly. And for imagery, they talk about using mental pictures or scenarios to fuel your motivation, like imagining yourself as a warrior or something like that to help you push through the pain and fatigue.
It's all about using the power of your mind to enhance your physical performance.
Exactly. And finally, the book talks about redefining what progress means.
How so?
It's about moving away from comparing yourself to the often unrealistic standards presented in muscle magazines.
Yeah, those pictures can be pretty discouraging.
Right. So instead, it's about comparing yourself to your past self, setting realistic goals, and recognizing progress in all its forms. Whether it's consistency in your training, small gains in muscle size, or just being able to lift a little more weight than you could before.
That's a much healthier and more sustainable way to measure your success.
Exactly. And that wraps up the Become the Alpha Male chapter. But the intensity doesn't stop there. The book then dives into an excerpt from the Psycho Trainer Guide by Joe Pasco. And this really takes things to another level.
Psycho Trainer Guide. Wow, that name alone sounds intense.
It is intense. This guide is presented as a method for people who feel like they've hit a plateau and want to really break through their limits. And it's all about pushing yourself to the point of pain.
I see. So it's not for the faint of heart.
Definitely not. The guide emphasizes two key elements: having a sadistic partner and using sadistic exercise methods.
Okay, now that's just scary. What do they even mean by sadistic?
Well, basically it means someone who is going to push you beyond what you think you're capable of. They're not going to let you slack off. They're going to yell at you, insult you, and do whatever it takes to get you to keep going.
That sounds intense.
It is. They even have these specific signs of a good set, to tell if you're pushing yourself hard enough.
Like what?
Well, they say you should be experiencing extreme pain, significant muscle soreness for a day or two afterwards, making strange noises, having your face turn different colors, and maybe even seeing stars.
Wow, that sounds pretty extreme. Are they serious?
Yeah, they're totally serious. They even reference the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket as an example of the kind of mentality you need to have.
Okay, that's pretty intense.
It is. The guide really emphasizes the importance of having someone there to push you, to motivate you, to hold you accountable.
I can see how that could be helpful, but it sounds like it could also be really easy to take things too far.
Definitely. And that's why the guide also talks about how to beware the slacker. How to identify and counteract those moments when your partner tries to lift too lightly or do fewer reps. The advice is basically to be relentless.
Yeah.
Demand more weight, more reps, and don't let them get away with anything less than their absolute best effort.
So it's all about pushing each other to the absolute limit.
Right. And they even have this thing called the lying principle.
The lying principle, what's that?
Well, it's basically about tricking your partner into lifting more weight than they think they can. They use the example of training on a weight machine and secretly adding more weight when your partner isn't looking.
Oh, wow. That's pretty sneaky.
It is, but the guide argues that it can be effective in helping people overcome their mental barriers. They also provide a whole list of motivational phrases that you can scream at your partner during lifts.
Like what?
Oh, things like, you call that a lift. My grandma can lift more than that. Or, get your ass in gear. You're embarrassing yourself.
This is stuff like that.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. And the point is to use anger, fear, and humiliation to motivate your partner.
I don't know about that. It seems like that could backfire pretty easily.
It definitely could. But the guide emphasizes that even when your partner is struggling, you should never let up. You should keep demanding more reps, keep pushing them harder. And for those who are training alone, they have this thing called the boastful claim method.
What's that?
It's basically where you challenge imaginary partners to rep competitions, to try to beat their score, even though they don't actually exist.
So it's all about creating competition, even if it's just in your own head.
Exactly. The idea is to use whatever you can to fuel your own intensity and motivation.
So this Psycho Trainer Guide is definitely an extreme approach.
Yeah.
It seems like you'd have to be very careful with it.
Definitely. It's not for everyone, but it's a fascinating example of the lengths that some people will go to in pursuit of muscle growth. And it definitely fits with the overall hardcore mentality.
It does.
So moving on from those extreme training methods, the book then gets into the practicalities of building muscle with a chapter called Build Mass with Massive Lifts.
Build mass with massive lifts. That sounds more my speed.
It starts by directly challenging those quick fix promises you see in muscle magazines, the ones that say you can gain tons of muscle in just a few weeks. They emphasize that building real, lasting muscle mass requires a lot more than that. It takes consistent hard work and dedication.
So no shortcuts.
Exactly. They say it's like building a brick house. You have to lay the foundation first before you can start focusing on the details. So in this case, you need to build a solid base of overall muscle mass before you even think about trying to get ripped.
Makes sense. You have to have the mass to sculpt, right?
Right. And when it comes to building that mass, the book stresses the importance of multi-joint or compound exercises over isolation exercises.
What's the difference again?
Well, compound exercises are movements that work multiple muscle groups at the same time. Things like squats, deadlifts, bench presses, rows, and overhead presses. These exercises give you the most bang for your buck in terms of overall muscle stimulation and growth.
Okay, yeah, I remember. And isolation exercises are the ones that target just one specific muscle group at a time.
Right. And the book is saying that while isolation exercises can be helpful for refining certain muscle groups, they shouldn't be the main focus of your training if your goal is to build serious mass.
So compound exercises are king.
Basically, yeah. And the chapter goes on to give specific exercise recommendations for each major muscle group. For example, for biceps, they recommend barbell curls and various rowing exercises. For triceps, they suggest close grip bench presses and triceps pushdowns. For the back, they recommend rows, pull-ups, and deadlifts. And for the legs, it's all about squats, leg presses, and deadlifts.
So it's a pretty comprehensive list of exercises that covers all the major muscle groups.
It is. And they even have these sections called Exercise Spotlight. They go into detail about the proper form and technique for each exercise.
That's helpful.
It is. They talk about things like hand placement, foot position, range of motion, and common mistakes to avoid.
Safety and effectiveness.
Exactly. They even include some advanced techniques for those who are more experienced. And then they touch on the debate between free weights and machines.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic debate.
They actually quote Ed Corney again, who says that while he prefers free weights, machines can still be effective. The key is intensity. It doesn't really matter what kind of equipment you're using, as long as you're training hard and pushing yourself.
So the tool is less important than how you use it.
Exactly. And then they get into sets, reps, and rest periods. They recommend a very focused, business-like approach to training.
What does that mean?
Well, it means limiting your rest periods to no more than 2 to 3 minutes between sets, focusing on doing 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps for each exercise, and making sure that the last 2 sets are the heaviest you can handle.
So it's all about maintaining that intensity and really challenging yourself.
Exactly. And speaking of intensity, the book emphasizes that it's absolutely crucial for muscle growth.
Makes sense.
Ed Corney is quoted again, this time saying that you shouldn't do too many sets or make your workouts excessively long. He emphasizes the importance of quality over quantity.
So how do you know how heavy is heavy enough?
The book says it's the maximum weight you can lift while still maintaining perfect form.
So no ego lifting.
Definitely not. The emphasis is on safety and effectiveness. And finally, the chapter lays out a basic workout program, emphasizing the idea that less is more. They recommend training a maximum of 3 times per week, focusing on those heavy, basic compound exercises we talked about earlier. Larger muscle groups like the chest, back, and legs are trained twice per week, while smaller muscle groups like the biceps and triceps are trained once per week.
That's a pretty standard approach for building muscle mass.
It is. And they even provide a sample workout routine. For example, on Monday, you might do bench press, leg press, shoulder press, bicep curls, and triceps extensions. On Wednesday, you might do bent over rows, squats, shoulder press again, dips, and some ab work. And then on Friday, you might do deadlifts, chest exercises, back exercises, upright rows, and more ab work.
So you're hitting each muscle group hard once or twice a week, giving them plenty of time to recover and grow.
Right. And then they talk about what to do if you hit a plateau. They recommend things like taking a week off to fully rest, deloading your weights, incorporating strength training with lower reps and higher sets, changing the order or days of your exercises, trying a new gym environment, using supersets, and reducing your rest periods.
So it's about having strategies to break through those sticking points and keep making progress.
Exactly. The chapter ends with another great quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger, this time saying, "The last 3 or 4 reps is what makes the muscle grow." This area of pain divides the champion from someone else who is not a champion. That's what most people lack, having the guts to go on and just say they'll go through the pain no matter what happens.
It's about pushing through that discomfort. That's what separates the successful from the rest.
Exactly. And of course, all that intense training requires proper fuel. Which brings us to the next chapter, Eat Meat, the real guide to nutrition.
Eat meat. Sounds pretty straightforward.
Right off the bat, the book debunks the myth that you need to eat massive amounts of calories to gain muscle naturally. They explain that those really high calorie intakes, like 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day, are usually only necessary for people who are using steroids.
Oh, okay, so it's another example of the book drawing a clear distinction between natural and enhanced body manning.
Exactly. They emphasize that for natural lifters, diet is absolutely crucial. It's one of the foundational pillars of your training, and it's often overlooked in favor of focusing on supplements.
Which, as we've already established, are not the magic solution they're often made out to be.
Right. They say that supplements should be just that. Supplements. They should complement a healthy diet, not replace it.
So what kind of diet do they recommend?
They introduce what they call the 40-30-30 training diet.
What's that?
Well, it means that 40% of your daily calories should come from carbohydrates, 30% from protein, and 30% from fat. They provide some guidelines for calculating your individual calorie needs based on your lean body weight and how often you train. And they also explain how to zigzag your calorie intake.
A zigzag, what does that mean?
It means having more up-zig days where you eat extra calories on your training days to support muscle growth and recovery. And then you have more down-zig days where you eat fewer calories on your non-training days to help manage your body fat levels. They also recommend making adjustments to your calorie intake every month based on changes in your lean body weight.
So it's a flexible approach that can be adjusted to fit your individual needs and goals.
Right. The book also includes a section with various helpful tips for healthy eating. They talk about the importance of drinking plenty of water, eating fresh fruits and vegetables, not skipping breakfast, and choosing healthy snack options.
So basic, good nutrition advice.
Exactly. But they also delve into the specifics of each macronutrient, carbs, protein, and fat. They talk about the role that each one plays in your body and how to make sure you're getting enough of each.
I'm guessing they have a lot to say about protein.
They do. They emphasize that you don't need to eat as much protein as you might think. You often see these recommendations for bodybuilders to eat like 2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. But the book says that's way too much for most people. They cite studies that suggest that around 1 gram of protein per 2.2 pounds of body weight is sufficient.
That's a lot less than what's often recommended.
It is. And they talk about the importance of protein quality, explaining that complete proteins, like those found in eggs, meat, and dairy, contain all the essential amino acids your body needs. They also warn about the potential downsides of eating too much protein.
What kind of downsides?
Well, they say that it can put extra stress on your kidneys and liver, and it can lead to dehydration and calcium loss. They also point out that your body can only absorb a certain amount of protein at a time, so eating massive amounts of protein at every meal isn't going to help you build muscle any faster.
Interesting. So it's about finding that sweet spot, getting enough protein to support muscle growth without going overboard.
Exactly. And to wrap up the chapter, they include some recipes submitted by readers.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they're all high-protein meals that fit with the overall dietary approach of the book. They even break down the nutritional content of each recipe.
So you've got the theory and the practical application.
Right. And that brings us to the chapter for those who are considering taking their bodybuilding journey to the next level. Competition.
Competition. Wow. Okay, so we're getting serious now.
The chapter is called So You Want to Compete, and it features a first-hand account from a natural bodybuilder named Bell McGadelberry. He talks about the intense physical and mental demands of preparing for and participating in a natural bodybuilding competition.
It must be grueling.
It is. He talks about the years of training required before you even consider stepping on stage, the importance of objectively assessing your physique against other competitors, and the extreme dieting that's often involved.
It's not for everyone, that's for sure.
Definitely not. Cabell describes contest dieting as being like having 2 full-time jobs. He says it requires an incredible amount of discipline and dedication. He even compares the intensity of contest prep to military boot camp.
Wow. Okay, so this is way beyond just going to the gym a few times a week.
It is. He provides a detailed 14-week timeline for contest preparation, including things like taking progress photos, getting a body composition analysis, meticulously tracking your food intake, eliminating all junk food, and gradually adding in low-intensity cardio.
Sounds pretty intense.
It is, and it gets even more intense as the competition gets closer. He talks about the gradual reduction in calories, the increase in cardio, and the addition of vitamin supplements. He even describes a technique called sodium loading, where you actually increase your salt intake for a few weeks before the competition and then drastically reduce it in the final week to manipulate your body's water retention and achieve that super lean look.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot of science and strategy involved.
Definitely. And it takes a toll mentally as well as physically. Cabell talks about the mood swings, the irritability, and the intense hunger that come with contest dieting.
It sounds brutal.
It can be. He also describes a 3-day revolving carb cycling approach that's often used in the final weeks before the competition.
Carb cycling?
Yeah, it's a way of manipulating your carbohydrate intake to help deplete your glycogen stores and then replenish them at specific times, which can help you achieve that shredded look.
I see. So it's all about timing and manipulating your body's systems to get that peak condition for the competition.
Exactly. And then he goes into detail about the final week before the competition, which is even more intense.
What happens during that week?
Well, there's a lot of carb depletion and carb loading, water loading and water cutting, and even the use of glycerol to photomanipulate water retention.
Sounds complicated.
It is. And then there's the actual competition day. Cabell talks about the weigh-in, the pre-judging, the backstage pump-up routines, the mandatory poses, the free posing routines, and the final placings.
It sounds like a roller coaster of emotions.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
But he also emphasizes the camaraderie among the competitors.
Yeah.
Everyone is going through the same grueling process, so there's a real sense of mutual respect and support.
That's cool. It's nice to know that even in a competitive environment, there can still be a sense of community.
Definitely. But Cabell also ends the chapter with a very important disclaimer. He stresses that this is a very extreme and specific approach to dieting and training, and it's definitely not something that should be attempted by those who are just starting out or who are just
Yeah.
looking to improve their general fitness.